Hello and welcome Star Wars Unlimited fans. I'm Justin with Gamers Guild USA and welcome to our first Star Wars content video. With planetary qualifiers just around the corner, it's my job to help get you prepared for those tournaments. I'm going to be covering the top archetypes that you're going to be facing, as well as the top meta decks in those archetypes that you're going to be facing, as well as some spicy alternatives to help you beat the meta. Today we're going to be covering Aggro and everything Aggro. What is Aggro? What are its strengths and weaknesses? And what are some of the top decks? All of the decks that we'll be talking about today will be in the description below. Let's get to it. So what makes Aggro Aggro? So first and foremost, what makes Aggro Aggro is early effective leaders. That's kind of easy in Star Wars Unlimited right now because there are really only two leaders that fit the bill, Sabine Wren and Kylo. Why? Because they flip on 4. They also have abilities that help you push damage in the early game. Really, when you're sitting down across from one of these two leaders, you already know you're playing against Aggro. This is where they're established. This is what they do. The second thing that makes Aggro Aggro is having a proactive game plan. What that means is you're the one in the game presenting the problem that your opponents have to answer. This is Aggro's greatest strength. This is how it can punish your opponent having a slow draw, maybe not having the most optimal draw. If they miss a play on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, this is where you really punish them. Your deck is not aiming to go long. Anytime your opponent fumbles, you're the one in the driver's seat. The third and maybe most important aspect of what makes Aggro Aggro, and why I believe Aggro is one of the hardest archetypes in the game to play, unlike most other games, is lane dodging. What lane dodging means is that when you're building your curve for an aggro deck, or when you're playing against an aggro deck and what you're expecting to see them play, depends on what your opponent can do to stop them or what you can do to stop them. And what I mean by that is that if I have the initiative and I'm playing an aggro deck, I want to put my next play in the zone that I feel like has the best chance of actually connecting with my opponent's base. If I know my opponent's playing a really ground control heavy deck, I want to lane swap or lane dodge over to the space zone as much as I can. If I see my opponent playing a space unit, I want to lane dodge over to the ground. The reason I want to do this is because I'm not trying to trade card for card or blow for blow with my opponent when I'm playing aggro. What I'm trying to do is get damage in. The best way to do that is by dodging what your opponent can do to stop you. The reason why I think this makes aggro one of the hardest styles to play in Star Wars is that you have to do a lot of prep to understand what your opponent can do to stop you on any given turn. The other big thing that makes Aggro Aggro is its reach. How can it actually finish the game after your opponent has taken board control? Do your colors even have effective reach out? Can you get those last points of damage in after your opponent has stopped you? This is really what defines a good aggro deck, and this is why I think Sabine has really been a testament to what aggro is in this game, because the leader itself has reach. So moving on to the biggest strengths and weaknesses of aggro. I feel aggro's greatest strength, especially when we're considering planetary qualifiers, is decision fatigue. You're going to be playing a lot of rounds, you're going to be playing against a lot of good opponents, and the last thing you want to do is get tired by the end of the day and start making misplays, start, I don't know, in any other sense, just making inoptimal plays because you've just made so many decisions that day, you've been playing so long that you're just not playing at your best. Aggro decks, I feel like in big tournaments, are the best decks to bring in some scenarios for a lot of people because you have to make a lot less decisions in your games. Your games are a lot quicker. You have a chance to go take snack breaks, get water. You have a chance to actually take a lunch break in the middle of a big tournament, whereas a lot of other decks do not give you that option. And I've sort of talked about this before, but I think the greatest weakness of aggro is that you have to do the most amount of prep with building your aggro deck versus most other decks in the format, because you have to know exactly what your game plan is every single turn for the first 4 or 5 turns of every single game so that you can maximize your damage and minimize what people can do to stop you. Now, finally, let's get into the decks. The first deck that I want to cover is Sabine Green. And this deck comes from us from a Gen Con player by the name of Andrew Evans. And I think we all know what this deck is. It's been around from set 1, it's back in set 2. I think in set 1, you could make a case that Sabine Green was not actually the best color combination. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna tell you what I think, that I don't think Sabine Green was the best color combination for green in set 1, but in set 2, an argument can be made. Cards have gotten a lot better. The options for Sabine Green have gotten a lot better. And what makes it better now? The big additions, Cassian, Poe, Wrecker. Instead of Sabine being stopped in the middle of the game, it kind of goes a little bit heavier now, especially with energy conversion left. Now you're not stopping on K2SO, now you're going up to Poe, now you're going up to Wrecker, and you're controlling the board. You also give yourself a lot more options for big hitters, big damage dealers. To a lower extent, I think Darksaber does add a few things to the deck as well. If you know your opponent isn't really packing any answers to a big leader that has a Darksaber on it, you can really push a lot of damage with it. And I think what's essential to playing Sabine Green is knowing how to build your curve. And a big thing in all Sabine decks and all aggro decks and really all Star Wars decks, but specifically with aggro decks, is you need to have options to play towards the ground or to space every single turn. That's why you'll see a nice split in most of the aggro decks that I present today with your options on any given turn so that you can lane dodge appropriately. Lane dodging is your friend. Learn how to do it, play games, get your reps in so that you know how to not get stopped when trying to deal damage. Good options for sideboarding for a lot of aggro decks, especially Sabine, are ways to deal with upgrades. Somebody's trying to put upgrades on your units to stop them. If your aggro opponent is putting upgrades to deal you more damage, how do you stop them? Things like that. If you're trying to go late, Heck is a new option from set 2 that's good in every deck if you're just trying to get a little bit more longevity out of your cards. And realistically, any other things that you feel like will help you push through damage. The last time I say that, I'll promise. Probably not, I might say it again. All right, and now let's get into the new blood. The next deck that I want to cover with you is the new kid on the block, Kylo. Kylo Yellow specifically. This deck has been showing up recently in locals and in big tournaments, most recently at Gen Con. This one's brought to you by Jacob Boff, who did really well. And if you take a look at it, this takes a different approach to aggro, a much more aggressive approach than Sabine, which is crazy. I didn't know that we could go any faster, but if you look at the composition of this deck, 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, the end, but mostly 1 drops. Why? How does this make sense? How am I supposed to play a game with just all these tiny little dudes? Well, the way you do it is by, in Star Wars, there's this ebb and flow of the game, and most decks in the game aren't aggro, they are mid-range. What they aim to do is play their best thing on curve every single time. My best 1 drop, followed by my best 2 drop, followed by my best 3 drop. Aggro tries to cheat action economy in the early game in favor of going for card economy in the late game or trying to stretch the game out because we're aggro. So I'm trying to play 2 actions per turn, 2 units per turn to try to break the balance of a on-curve play turn by turn back and forth with my opponent. This deck rips that idea and sends it into overdrive. You're trying to play 2 cards per turn, you're trying to discard one of the cards in your hand to buff one of your units with Kylo Leader's ability, and you're trying to end the game fast. You're trying to play a lot of cards that have smuggle, so that you can get extra value out of cards that you're resourcing early. This deck has no stop button. It says go until your opponent either deals with it or they lose. I think Kylo has shown up. I think that it is a formidable deck. I think that it can win by turn 3, and it is kind of a nightmare when playing against it if you're not prepared for it. This is the first version that I think a lot of you might know, where it has a lot of ground units and it really just tries to overwhelm your opponent. But this is not the only style of Kylo Yellow you can play. Next deck I want to talk to you about is Kylo Yellow Space variation. And this one's actually brought to you by one of our local community members, Ty. He brought this to a locals not too long ago and basically asked the question to everybody in the room, can you stop space? And that's what this deck does. It has a few ground units, of course. You want to play as many 1-drops as you can in a style of deck like this, but it also just goes space afterward. Really, the only way to stop this deck is if you have good space defense, if you can finally get to a turn where you can overwhelming barrage the board. But otherwise, if you're not packing enough space units, this deck will overwhelm you and kind of put you in a bind. It also gets to utilize Outmaneuver, which I think is one of the most underutilized cards in the game, where it presents a big space board and then really just kind of manipulates the ground so that it can finish the game off. I think either of these two variations can serve you well if you're looking to play an aggressive game plan in your next planetary qualifier, and I'd try them both out. See if you like space or ground. And then the last deck I want to cover with you is my own deck, actually. This is a deck that I built for set 1, and really, in set 2, I didn't have to change very much. I took out Greedos and I added Cartel's Turncoat. I think in set 1, Sabine Yellow was the de facto aggro deck. I think it was better than green because it had better options. And to some extent, if I was going to a planetary qualifier myself, this is the deck I would probably start testing right now to bring. The reason being is because it provides the most reach of any of the aggro. It has the same game plan of trying to play multiple units early in the game, a lot of 1-drops, not as many as Kylo, of course. And then being able to split my options when going to ground or space in the following turns. Other reason I really like yellow is because it has a lot of interaction. Bamboozle, as a card, can really do work in the metagame right now. It really did a lot of work in the metagame last time. I don't see a lot of people playing this card. I think it is a fantastic card. It also has access to a very dominant space position against even other aggro decks with Millennium Falcon and Azatec Gunship. And I believe that it has, like I said, the most reach. Those options being Surprise Strike, For a Cause I Believe in, Millennium Falcon, Sneak Attack, and some quick combos I'll talk to you right now about with Sneak Attack. Sneak Attack with K2SO costing 3 resources, especially later in the game. When you have up to 5 resources to use, you can Sneak Attack them in, you can Surprise Strike them, you can deal 10 damage, kind of close games out very fast. The other combo with Sneak Attack, the big one, is Fleet Lieutenant. I don't know if you know this, but if you Sneak Attack in a Fleet Lieutenant, you can target itself and immediately deal your opponent 5 damage. So it gives you a bigger For a Cause, I believe in, later in the game. I think this deck has a lot of cool tools that will help you win games, and I think that it has a lot of options in utility to stop some of the other top meta decks from winning. In Bamboozle and Leia Organa, that you're playing against Boba Yellow and you really fear their flip turn, stop it. Tap down their leader. I think overall, this is the deck that I would bring to my next planetary qualifier, but I think all of these aggro options are great. And I think aggro decks are one of the best options you can bring to your next planetary qualifier because of what I talked about before in decision fatigue. I feel like getting your matches done quick, not stressing yourself out, being able to take lunch breaks, being able to review your games with your friends in between matches just so you can keep your head above water. I think aggro is a great place to be. If I were to play in a planetary qualifier next week, I think aggro is what I would be on because of everything we discussed. It presents the problems. It sets the pace of every single game. If you have prepped well enough for your planetary qualifier, you have ways to dodge every single way your opponent has to stop you. I think it is very rewarding to play aggro, and I think you should give it a try. And that's a wrap on aggro. What deck would you play? What cards would you change in the aggro decks? Let us know in the comments below. Also share with us if you'd like to see any other type of Star Wars content. We're always looking to make more content that you want to see. As always, if you need singles from us, go ahead and visit gamersguildaz.tcgplayerpro.com. If you need booster boxes, packs, or accessories for your Star Wars cards, please visit us at gamersguildaz.com. Thank you for watching the video, and of course, if you liked it, please like and subscribe the video. May the Force be with you for your next planetary qualifier, and I'll see you in the next one.